So welcome to our webinar on libraries, copyright and the commons, the second in a series of 4 EIFL webinars on copyright and libraries. My name is Teresa Hackett. I manage EIFL's programme on copyright and libraries. The webinar is scheduled for 1 hour. It's being recorded and we will share the recording and the materials afterwards in the next couple of days. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions after the presentations. So please use the Q&A function, and you can do that at any time throughout the webinar. And then we will keep an eye on the Q&A as well as on the chat as well. So today, this webinar will focus on the popular topic of Creative Commons licenses. We've had many requests from libraries in partner countries to have a webinar on on CC licenses that are very widely used for legally sharing and reusing copyright protected content in many areas, including open education, open science and research. We'll also mention the emerging issue of generative AI and CC licenses. And we will present some practical tools and resources that are used by librarians and researchers when applying CC licenses to materials. So I'm delighted to welcome our 3 expert presenters. First up is Shana Hollick. Shana is Learning and Training Manager at Creative Commons, where they identify and develop professional development and learning opportunities at Creative Commons, including the CC Certificates program. Prior to joining CC, Shana worked as a librarian in school, public, government and academic libraries, in access and technical services, cataloging and metadata and administration. And during this time, their research involved copyright reform, cultural heritage, open access, open education and social justice. Next speaker is Milica Ševkušić, who is EIFL's project coordinator on the EIFL Open Access Programme, EIFL OA. She also serves as EIFL's Open Access Coordinator in Serbia, where she is based. Milica works with libraries and research communities to promote open access and to provide support and training in open science. And we also have with us Iryna Kuchma, who is EIFL's Open Access Programme Manager, who will be available to answer questions. Iryna advocates for open access to research results, facilitates the development and implementation of open science policies and infrastructure, and provides support and training as well. So to kick us off, I'm going to hand over now to Shana, who will talk about sharing and using CC licenses for open education, science and research. So Shana, the floor is yours. And you're welcome to share your screen and we can follow your slides. Thanks a lot.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that introduction. And thanks again to EIFL for inviting us to be here today to talk to all of you. Just to sort of introduce a little bit about Creative Commons, what we do, who we are, and how you can share and use copyright protected works for open education, science, and research. So I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes or so, and please do put questions in the Q&A. We will probably address those questions all together at the end after all the presenters have spoken, but it would be great to start seeing those come in. So just in case there are those who aren't familiar with Creative Commons, who have maybe heard of us, but don't know a lot of details. We're an international nonprofit organization that supports the infrastructure that makes the public commons possible in today's digital environments. So the public commons, we feel that this is essential to enable us to address the world's most pressing challenges and create a brighter future for everyone. So for example, the United Nations and UNESCO have put together these sustainable development goals that are designed to help the world move forward to solve really big, complex problems. Things like providing education for all, things like tackling the effects of climate change, And we believe that if we want to solve the world's most pressing problems, then the knowledge and culture about those issues must be open and able to be shared so that folks can build on that research together. So just some examples of how we do that. We, along with several other partners you see on your screen, are involved in the Movement for a Better Internet. This is a collaborative effort to ensure that the internet's evolution is guided by public interest values. So this movement brings together diverse voices and facilitates connections and shares resources and drives policy change and legislation that helps make sure that resources and things like the internet stay in the public interest and that the public interest's visions and agenda are centered there. Another example of the work that we do, and it's our Open Climate campaign that it's been going on for a few years with these partners. And again, we think to solve problems like climate change, then we need open access to research and data in order to accelerate progress towards solving the climate crisis. We saw this, for example, during COVID, and we initiated the Open COVID Pledge, for example, to make COVID research available open access. In order to kind of solve these issues quickly and well, people need access to the research and the data and the articles that are coming out. If they're locked behind a paywall or restricted in some way, then scientists can't build upon that work because they may not be able to access that work or even know that it exists. So using CC licenses to share this content more open and more freely just helps us all move forward and advance as a society. I am going to put some links in the chat as we go. So for example, here is one link specific to our climate work. We do have some recommended best practices for better sharing of climate data. So we're not going to look at this in depth now, just for the interest of time, but just for you to bookmark and take a look at for later. And I just realized, let me put it in the everyone chat so everyone can see it. There we are. This just outlines some of the work that we've done in this particular area. Some other areas of focus that might be of interest, I know, to some of you, since I know many of you are librarians, if not all of you. Our Open Culture program does a lot of work to promote and sustain open access to cultural heritage, which helps build and sustain vibrant and thriving societies. I mean, if we don't have access to our heritage, then we can't fully grow and thrive as people. So we help support galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. We often call these GLAM institutions or sometimes cultural heritage institutions, giving them resources and tools they can use to make sure their collections are as openly accessible, shareable, and reusable as possible, both in person, on site, and online. And this just empowers folks to continue to build on those resources and use them to promote greater scientific, historical, and sociocultural understanding. Similarly, our work in open education. Again, one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals is about how every individual must must have equitable access to be able to acquire knowledge and skills and values that are critical to tackling our shared challenges. And open education is a big part of helping folks do that. Sharing content openly means not only that it's free for folks to access, as in free of cost, but also free of most copyright restrictions, so that now you could take content from me, I'm situated in the United States, and you could personalize it and localize it to your context in Ireland or in Ghana. And I could do the same. There's some great education materials coming out of some wonderful places And I could customize those materials and adapt them so that they are relevant to my specific community. And those are things that are kind of only available with open access materials. So, why do we think open access is so great? Why did we build this infrastructure to support it? Traditional publishing has a lot of barriers to access. There's legal barriers like copyright restrictions that are difficult for folks to understand or even kind of know what they can and can't do with research or articles that they find online. There are technical barriers. There are financial barriers when that content is put behind a paywall, for example. And traditional publishing really perpetuates unbalanced power relationships among researchers, research institutions, publishers, libraries, and the general public. And the rise of digital technologies and the internet makes it technologically easier for us to share and collaborate, even across very disparate parts of the world. So we felt that we needed uh, an approach to sharing and an approach to scientific publishing that favors that increased access and greater collaboration and more fairness in who has access to these materials and who gets to use them. It's important to note also that many funders now, especially governments, so a lot of like the US federal government, for example, and many philanthropic foundations like the Gates Foundation actually require that research outputs be published openly with a CC license. So in order to guarantee that the public can continue to access, use, reuse, and build upon the knowledge created. So a lot of research, for example, is funded by grants from governments and philanthropic foundations. And a lot of those grants now require that, they're often using public taxpayer dollars to fund that research. And so it's important that the research that comes out as a result is given back to the public and shared openly and freely. So we consistently advocate for these open access policies, especially on publicly funded research outputs. So we have a short amount of time. I will not be going into too much detail about the different licenses and exactly how they work, although I have some information and resources for you at the end, and I'm happy to share these slides with the folks at EIFL if they want to distribute them along with the recording. But these you've likely seen as you've done your work. If you're on the internet, if you've ever used Wikipedia, for example, Wikipedia is CC by SA licensed. If you've used open educational resources and OER, or if you've read or published open access articles, you have seen our licenses and legal tools in action. So we're the nonprofit that created and stores these 6 licenses you see at the top of your screen and the 2 public domain tools below. And we designed them to be easily understood by humans. The logos are pretty recognizable, and we have a lot of information on our website that explains each of the licenses in very simple and clear terms. But we also have metadata embedded into these licenses that makes them machine readable so that search engines, for example, can tell if an item that they are crawling is CC licensed. So if you've ever used Google image search, there are some advanced search tools that you can use to filter your results just to results that are CC licensed. And the reason Google is able to do that is because our licenses include this machine readable content. And the CC licenses were created by lawyers and legal advocates from all over the world. They are currently translated into languages of more than 50 countries, and they work everywhere that has copyright. CC licenses will work in those jurisdictions. So this is an enormously powerful tool that provides the infrastructure for legal voluntary sharing that helps create this global world of shared and shareable knowledge resources. So we're strong supporters of open access and open science and have built this infrastructure that makes sharing possible. Our licenses and tools are the global standard. Like we said, the tools were created over 20 years ago, in around 2001, 2002. They have held up in court. They are fully usable and legal and across every jurisdiction that has copyright law and has signed international treaties. So it's almost 200 countries have signed the Berne Convention, for example, which is one of the big copyright international treaties. And we try to make these licenses, they are free. In fact, the actual license text has been dedicated to the public domain. So if something ever happens to Creative Commons as an organization, for example, the licenses will live on. They are public domain, free content with no copyright restrictions and available for folks to use. So we created, we standardized this way of sharing to make it easy to use, easy to understand. So folks, they see that icon and they know right away, here's what I can and cannot do with this content. And that everyone worldwide knows the conditions that they can use to share and access content. So yeah, we work to ensure that the public is able to immediately access, free of charge, free of copyright restriction, the publications and data that result from academic and scientific research. And we do this because there are a lot of benefits to doing this. You all probably know a lot of these benefits already. For researchers, publishing open access means that more people know about your research. It spreads wider and you can disseminate it more broadly. More people will see it and be able to use it. For funders, they get a better return on their investment. So if I'm a big grant funder agency and I'm funding some research, I want people to be able to see and use that research. And my name will be attached to that research. So everyone will know that, I funded this awesome work. And isn't it great now that everybody can use and build off of this work together? And just for the scientific community and even the general public at large, providing open access to research makes things more available to everyone, which helps stimulate participation in knowledge creation and sharing and encourages innovation by building upon shared content. So somebody does some research and now I have access to that research and I can build on that research. I can translate it into another language. I can adapt it into other formats. I can use that research as a basis for my own work. These are all things that traditional copyright restricts us. You have to go and ask for permission first. But CC licensing your content allows people to do all those things by default. So now I can find some research and build upon it and move science and society forward faster and better. Can also help manage the spread of disinformation and misinformation. It makes information available to everyone instead of hiding it behind paywalls. So good, solid scientific facts now become available to the entire community at large, to the general public, rather than being locked behind a publisher paywall that only someone at a very privileged institution or university could ever afford to access. So as a general rule, we strongly advocate that folks publish research and data with as few restrictions as possible. So we advocate for 0 embargo periods. So rather than, waiting a year or two to actually make your content available, we recommend doing it right away so that folks everywhere can read the research fully and immediately at the moment of publication. CC licenses do allow authors to retain their copyright. So a lot of folks assume that CC replaces copyright, but it actually builds on top of copyright. If there's no copyright, then there's no CC license. And we'll talk about this in a second when I talk briefly about generative AI. So authors still retain all of their rights. They just get to decide which rights they're comfortable giving to the public. So a CC BY license, for example, allows folks to use and share your work, but there are some requirements, right? It requires that anyone who does use or share your work gives you credit, provides proper attribution for doing that. So a CC BY license allows for translations, adaptations, text and data mining, all the things that researchers do with the work that they find. So these are just some of the recommendations. I want to talk briefly. I apologize because I don't have a special slide for this. But I want to talk briefly about CC licenses and generative AI. And there is an image I can put on the screen here. I'm not going to walk through this flow chart step by step, but I will put a link to it in the chat for those of you who are interested. We have some information on our blog, for example, about CC licenses and generative AI. And that's where this image comes from. A lot of people wonder how AI affects CC licenses, what's going to happen. And the answer is we're not 100% sure yet. The way that AI interacts with copyright is something that's still being legislated in many, many places, including the US and the EU. And we're sort of waiting for the courts to figure out what exactly is going to work. But some of the common questions we get, for example, are CC licenses people use works for AI training, or kind of how does that affect? And one of the important things to know is that CC licenses grant permission for reuse in any situation that would require permission under copyright. So if I have some content, in order to make a copy of that content and share it with my friends, or to translate it into another language or adapt it into another format, under traditional copyright, I cannot do that unless I go to the copyright creator and ask for permission, and they explicitly tell me, yes, you can do that in this particular instance. Usually you get some sort of contract or license to do that. So the CC licenses are a quick and easy way to say, you don't have to track me down and get my permission. I'm just telling you automatically, you have permission to do these things under these conditions. But the licenses do not supersede existing limitations and exceptions to copyright that already exist in the law. So if there's something that's allowed under copyright, you can't use a CC license to further restrict it. CC licenses tend to make things more open. They don't really make things less open. So this is directly relevant to AI because there are some strong arguments that using copyrighted works to train AI might be protected under existing exceptions and limitations to copyright. And this is the stuff that's still being legislated. But in the US, for example, using copyrighted works to train generative AI models might be a clear case of fair use. And that training in the EU similarly might be protected by the text and data mining exceptions that are in the EU law. So if you're using content under one of those exceptions, then the license can't provide any more restrictions. So there are some things to kind of think about. If your AI training is covered by an exception or limitation to copyright, then you don't need to rely on the CC license in order to use it. If you are using CC licensed content and relying on that to train your AI, then you're going to need to follow the relevant requirements under the licenses. There's other things that make this more complicated when it comes to generative AI, because a lot of the issues that folks are having kind of go beyond copyright. And CC licenses only work with copyright. We only give permission for rights that are granted by copyright. So there are other things like privacy laws that might restrict the material that you use to train a generative AI system. Anytime you're using material that contains personal data, for example, there are some privacy related regulations you need to think of. And those are separate from the licenses. So there might be something where, under copyright, under the CC license, it's okay to use, but privacy laws or just the ethics of data sharing might make it not okay to use. There are ethical concerns, of course, around AI, like the issue of consent and bias and economic impacts. Who has access to and control over this powerful technology? And copyright law and CC licenses both can't always address these other sorts of issues. But one thing CC has been working on, and I'm going to put another link in the chat for you, is what we've been calling preference signals for AI training. You know, we recognize there are a lot of creators out there who would like more control over how their content is used for AI. So, you know, over 20 years ago, we knew creators wanted more control over how their work was shared and used. So we created these licenses, right? Because copyright says no one can share or use your work. They have to get your permission first. And we said, oh, well, there's some other options. Some people want to say, yes, you can use and share my work in these situations. And similarly, we're exploring the idea of preference signals or some other sort of tool that allows creators to say, you know, yes, you can use all of my content for AI training in whatever way you want. Or there's folks who don't want any of their content used for AI training under any circumstances. But there's a whole spectrum in between where folks might be okay with their content being used to train generative AI under certain conditions. You know, it may be if the AI model is also open and openly licensed and the source code is openly licensed, then I might be okay with my content being used for that AI system. Or I might be okay with my content being used so long as I'm given credit and attribution, which is another issue with a lot of the current generative AI models, and that they don't have a very good way of doing that, citing their sources. So this is something we're kind of exploring. If you have thoughts on this, please do reach out to us. Okay, let me get back to this screen. And I just have a couple minutes just to wrap up this part of the presentation. And like I said, we will have lots of time for questions at the end. I know I've seen some really good questions in the chat that I'll get to in a little bit. But I just have some information for those of you who want to get more involved in the work that Creative Commons does. We have these global, we call them our network platforms, but they're communities of practice. So folks who do work and advocacy in these different areas can get together with folks from all over the world who do similar work. And they can share ideas, share success stories, share best practices, and develop policy and plans to help move open forward. So we have a platform centered around open education for educational content, OER. We have one centered around open culture to allow cultural heritage institutions to share resources and collaborate. And we have our copyright platform, which is for folks who are really interested in the legal aspect of these things and really want to plan and coordinate copyright law and policy related activities. We also have a number of learning and training opportunities. This is what I do for CC, so I had to include this here. Our certificate program is a great way to take a deep dive into the licenses and exactly how they work. If you're using works with multiple licenses, how does that work? Can you do that? Can certain things be mixed together? These are details we get into in our certificate program. It's a 10-week online program. Asynchronous. We have folks that join us from all over the world for that. We also do custom trainings, webinars. We'll come and talk to folks like this, or we could come to your institution if you have, you know, your whole department needs to know more about copyright and CC licenses. We can do that. And we also have some regular office hours with our legal team, that sort of thing. We consult with universities, institutions, philanthropic organizations and funding organizations to develop open access policy and to kind of help them move their work forward. So if you're interested, definitely reach out. My contact information is here. Like I said, you'll have access to these slides. And so at this point, I would like to turn things over to our next speakers.
All right, thank you very much, Shana. That was really great, and I think you provided some very useful resources and other information there. I think there were three things that I really picked up on and I liked, is that Creative Commons licenses build on top of copyright. I think that's an important point. Also, the Creative Commons licenses involve the legal voluntary sharing of copyright protected content, and the jury is still out on generative AI, and we're still feeling our way through all of those issues. And I think the statement from Creative Commons is a helpful start. So we have some questions in the chat and in the Q&A, which we will get to afterwards. And I encourage everyone to put some more questions in there for our presenters. And now I'll hand over to Milica, who's going to discuss some of the practical aspects of using Creative Commons licenses and resources that are often used by librarians and researchers when applying CC licenses to their materials. So Milica, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. As Teresa mentioned, our presentation will be a bit painfully practical because we work with libraries and we often encounter very basic questions. And actually we realize that constant training and repeating those basic things is very important for libraries, because we are having new generations of librarians coming, we are having new generations of researchers coming, and they need this basic training. So I would say that the maturity of the adoption of Creative Commons licenses within the community is not still as we should expect, we could expect after so many years of them being around. So briefly, this presentation will outline some very common practices. We'll mention some typical use cases and some tools. Shana has already mentioned some of them, and only a few resources, training resources that you can use. So basically, when you look around on the internet, because Creative Commons licenses live in the internet, you can see Creative Commons symbols everywhere. In Wikipedia, as already mentioned, in Europeana, on YouTube, or in repositories, in journals, and book platforms, etc. But still, people see those symbols, but they don't realize their purpose. They don't realize their meaning. Sometimes they don't really have to think about this. But if they're researchers, if they need to use the content, if they want to share the content further, then if they want to reuse it, then they should know what those licenses, what those symbols mean. But basically they don't, and this is a huge issue also for us working very much in the open science area. Creative Commons licenses are crucial because they are mentioned in many grant agreements, they are mentioned in policies, national, institutional, etc. They are all over the place, and that's why this is a very, very important topic, and it's pretty popular among librarians because they often ask for additional training on Creative Commons. This is probably one of the most popular topics. So why Creative Commons licenses are important for libraries and for librarians? Basically, they are important for all libraries. So libraries have increasingly often they have CC licensed open access content in their holdings. This could be journals, books, whatever. Also, libraries create a lot of materials, training materials, some leaflets, some, I don't know, guides, LibGuides, etc. And they should license, they should make it open. They usually make it free to read. To all users, but some libraries also use Creative Commons licenses to enable reuse of these materials or to tell how to use this, what users can do, what users can't do. So this would be, for example, a good practice for all libraries to use Creative Commons licenses for such materials. And also some libraries, even public libraries, but also research libraries, especially university libraries, they manage open access publishing units within their institutions, and that's the area where if this is open access publishing, they need to use Creative Commons licenses, and then they need to know how to apply it on the platform, how to choose, etc. For academic and research libraries, as already mentioned, this is especially important, and the quantity of questions, the scope of the topics related to copyright and CC licenses is even broader. So, for example, we need to explain to researchers how to interpret the licenses they find on publications, how to choose the license for their, I don't know, publication or author accepted manuscript when depositing in a repository. We also need to, when they are sharing, for example, research data, research protocols, etc., they need to use a license. And Creative Commons licenses provide this legal framework to do this, but they sometimes don't know how to choose this license and which license is appropriate. And also policy compliance is very important, and it's very important for researchers to be able to choose a publication venue that offers the license that is required by the policy. And then it's also very important for librarians to be able to train them and to explain them how to do this and how not to make a mistake. So there are many challenges, as already obvious from what is said. Generally speaking, the understanding of copyright and licensing, and especially the licensing in the internet environment, is generally poor among various stakeholders. For example, even managers, policymakers, they're not always aware. Librarians, especially young librarians who are just entering the arena, they may not be aware of those issues, and they need additional training about this. Also, there are many misconceptions about copyright in the digital environment. For example, in many countries, there is an idea, a wrong idea, that whatever is available on the internet can be reused without permission. It's actually vice versa. If it's not allowed, it cannot be used. But many people believe that it can be used merely because it's available and can be seen and downloaded from the internet. And also, there are many people who are applying CC licenses to print content that is only printed, that is not available online. So content needs to be available online because those licenses are applied to this content. It can be put on printed content, but if it's also available online. And also there are many, for example, in the use cases, typical use cases, common mistakes include, for example, omitting or putting incomplete creative information about licensing. So mentioning some things and not mentioning the others. Also, very often we can see this in scholarly journals. Editors and journals, they use they mismatch the symbol and the name of the license. So for example, you can see that the journal is using, it's written that the journal uses CC BY license, but then you see that next to this statement there is a logo of the CC BY share alike or CC BY non-commercial license. Also, you can very often see the license image, and also the all rights reserved statement. So these are very, very common mistakes, and it's very difficult to explain why those don't go together, although it should be self-explanatory. And also, sometimes you can even see different licenses, for example, in a journal policy and in the PDF. So these are very common mistakes. I chose one of quite typical issues. An example. So those licenses have, the license module, which actually says what can be done. Then there is a license version, because those licenses are getting updated. And there is the third element that is called jurisdiction. So the version 4, it has only international jurisdiction, but in previous versions, there were various country jurisdictions. And very commonly, for example, publishers, they believe that by changing the version, they are changing the conditions of use. So they believe, for example, if they want to restrict something to non-commercial use, that they need to change the version of the license, which is not the case. And they leave the same module. So the module says, for example, attribution, and then change the version and believe that they change the condition, which is not the case. So this is one of the typical errors, and one of the things that we repeatedly have to explain to our users and especially to publishers. I will now mention briefly just some of the use cases that are quite common for libraries, the things that we encounter in our daily work. So, for example, a user finds content in the internet, it has a CC license, and they don't know how they can use it. They don't know how to interpret the license. And we usually tell them, just go to the CC licenses website, Creative Commons website, and there you will find the very simple explanations. And we actually guide them through these explanations for the first time so that they know how to interpret this text. Another use case, very typical use case, and it's probably one of the most typical, most common, is when somebody wants to find the content that is under the CC license. So this is, for example, if they are making some presentations, or for example, writing a book or a PhD thesis, and then they need to have usually images, most commonly images, that they want to reuse, and they want to be sure that the license will be appropriate. And there are some search engines that can be very helpful. For example, this one is on the Creative Commons. This is Creative Commons search portal, and it covers multiple sources. You can search all those sources individually, and you can do just the common search for all of them. Also, you can, if you go, for example, to individual places, like for example Base, which is a repository aggregator, for example, or Google or Flickr, you will be able to filter by license. Google Advanced Search enables this as well. Also, Europeana, Figshare, which is a repository, Creative Commons, it's also possible to browse by license. And one of a very good tool, for me, this one is probably the most efficient, is OpenWorse, that actually is searching for CC licensed content. And what can be an issue, so it's very accurate when it finds a license, something. The matches are good for license, but you will probably need to adjust the search, because if you're searching for images and you're typing words in the search box, this could be, for example, difficult, but for licenses it's very good. So also, this is how Google Images work. You can filter and you can limit your search by a license, by Creative Commons licenses. Another typical use case is that an author wants to publish a work anywhere, in a journal, in a book, in a repository, or a preprint server, and they need to choose a license. There is usually a drop-down menu, and they can choose from the menu, and these menus very often include licenses that are not only CC licenses. So this can be confusing for the users, and then you have to explain to them how to choose and what actually to choose, especially, for example, if they need to meet policy requirements. Sometimes when they communicate with publishers offer them one or two licenses, sometimes even more, and then they need to write a statement in the letter to the publisher to say which license they want to use. So if they don't know how to use it, a very good tool is this license chooser that is available on the Creative Commons website, which actually guides them through the process by asking some questions, the crucial questions, and then when they make those choices in the tool, they get the license that is actually what they want, but expressed in the terms of license. Another typical use case is when an author wants to self-archive an author-accepted manuscript, and this is one of the most common cases in academic libraries and research libraries. And we usually, then they need to understand the license, but they also need to check the self-archiving policy defined by the publisher. And then we instruct them where to find those policies. There is a very good recording of a webinar organized by EIFL, so you can have a look there. We usually recommend them checking journal websites and the Share per Romeo database. Also, if a publisher wants to use a CC license in a journal or a book, then it's a more complex process because they have to make some decisions. Then they have to make this information easily findable on the website. So they have to integrate those licenses on the platform, but they also need to include licenses in the metadata, and they also need to include licenses in the full text, usually PDF files. And it's very, here we have many mistakes, many inconsistencies, and this is one of the most difficult processes when we are training, when we are supporting those stakeholders. This is usually quite complicated, and we need to repeat the same things many times and to check whether they've done this correctly. And another similar use case is the use of licenses in repositories. So most common open source repository platforms support licenses, and they support Creative Commons licenses. It's usually a module that needs to be enabled, and this module enables CC licenses to be displayed in a drop-down menu for users to use them. And there is also some technical fine-tuning because those licenses need to be included in the metadata. They need to be displayed in a machine-readable way also in the metadata and exposed through relevant protocols, and they also need to be included in the policy. So we usually, for example, mention that we use one license, this is 0, for metadata, and that each of the items deposited in the repository is labeled with the appropriate license because different licenses apply to different pieces of content. As for resources, I highly recommend this CC Wiki, which is quite extensive, and there are many issues covered there, and it's also searchable. Also, this Creative Commons certificate for educators, academic librarians, and open culture online book. Shana mentioned this, I believe. So it's also very good, and it's available online, and it's easy to handle and easy to read. Also, this guide to Creative Commons for scholarly publications and educational resources, it's very good because it has some questions that rely on use cases. So it's also very user-friendly, especially for beginners, and it's also available on Zenodo. You can download it. And there are also some more specific resources. For example, some resources for researchers. They are adjusted to researchers because they are covering more of a researchers' use cases. Also, it's a very good idea, especially if you're a beginner, to check LibGuides. Practically every university has LibGuides covering Creative Commons licenses. And if you are searching for non-English resources, this network and the network of national chapters of not every country has a chapter, but there you can find, for example, if you don't read English, you will find resources in French, in Japanese, etc., in various languages that can help you deal with these issues. That's all from me. So I'll stop sharing, and we are ready for the questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Milica, for that. I think very practical, explanation of the tools and the resources that are available, and then some of the issues that are faced by librarians and researchers when they're applying CC licenses in the real world to their research. Thanks also to Shana for that also very comprehensive presentation that gave us a lot of the background to the licenses. So you've all been very busy answering questions during the presentation. So we have had a number of questions that were in the Q&A which were answered by the presenters. But I would perhaps just like to maybe there was maybe two questions that you might like to say a little bit more about. First of all, there was a question about the application of Creative Commons licenses to content that wasn't originally owned by, not owned by a third party, if you like. So there was a question, if I understand it, about putting a CC license on paywalled content, and then also on photographs that were digitized. So it's important that only the copyright holder can apply a CC license to their work? I think that's one question. And then the other question, we had two questions on enforcement of CC licenses. And Milica put a link into the chat there. So maybe there are two questions that you might like to sort of say a little bit more about, while, and then we have another, we had another question coming in, but that was had already been answered. So I just invite the presenters to elaborate a little bit maybe on those two issues. Shana?
Who wants to go first?
Okay, you go first.
Sure. So I put some helpful links in the Q&A that I'm also going to put in the chat. But so one of the questions, for example, was about, you know, can you use a CC license on content that is restricted or behind a paywall? And I mean, legally, sure, but I'm not sure why you would want to do this. So if you have a CC license on something that's behind a paywall, the first person who accesses it behind the paywall, the CC license gives them the right to copy it and share it. So they could just go put it somewhere not behind a paywall, because that's what the CC license allows them to do. And now everyone has access to it. So we don't recommend that people restrict or paywall their content. It's very similar to sort of an embargo period, where, you know, the purpose of the CC license is to make things as openly available and allow people to share them. And a paywall or even a login, sometimes we call it a data wall, a login screen, is a barrier to that open sharing. Also a question about, you know, we mentioned that only the copyright holder can license their content. You know, only the person with the copyright can decide to give some of those rights to the public. But that copyright holder could be an individual or it could be an institution. So when researchers publish in an academic journal, for example, a lot of times they sign an author agreement or a contract that assigns their copyright to the journal or the institution that publishes the journal. And so now they're the copyright holder. And so that's who you would provide attribution to, or ideally you would include both and give the author credit for their work also. But yeah, there was another good question about someone in a library. Let me find this. Public library digitizing photographs from local residents. This is similar. So the photographer, when they take the photograph, they have the copyright in that photograph. So when they give permission to the library to digitize it and store it and share it on the library's website, somewhere in that agreement, we should also talk about that the photographer also agrees for that content to be CC licensed. So again, you know, specify that in the agreement that yes, the photographer allows the work to be digitized, stored, shared by X library under this particular CC license. And that's what allows you to apply the license to the work. I'm happy to let Milica add anything that I might have missed, or that some very practical things, which I really appreciated.
Very practical things. For example, I'm a Wikipedian, and interaction with Wikipedia was very instructive for some of our librarians in understanding Creative Commons licenses. For example, this use case with digitizing photographs of some people. And the photographs have their authors. We had to provide to our controller, we had to provide both the a statement from the author of the photograph, the photographer, and also from the person or from the family of this person who was photographed, in order to be able to put this image on Wikimedia Commons. And that's, for example, a very good and a very safe practice. And that's where we learned actually that we need to check those things. I usually simplify stuff and tell to people that there is no point. If they want the content to be paywalled, then they'd rather not use a Creative Commons license, because it doesn't really make sense. So it's legally possible, but it doesn't make sense. It doesn't bring clarity. So that's how we simplify those things. And we only use Creative Commons licenses on temporarily embargoed stuff in the repository, because once the embargo expires, they will become open, so it saves us time. We don't have to do this manually, and the users already know that the license applies since the moment the content becomes available.
Okay, thanks very much, Milica. So we have another couple of, excuse me, we have another couple of questions coming in that I'd like to try and quickly deal with before we wrap up our session. There was one question, Shana, you were going to answer live about the use of commercial CC non-commercial licenses. Thank you.
Yes, as with many questions about copyright, the answer sort of depends on some details. So the question is that CC licensed works that have restrictions on non-commercial reuse. So there are some licenses that have an NC, non-commercial condition, which says you can use and share this work, but only for non-commercial purposes. Can you use those tools to train a commercial generative AI tool like ChatGPT? And the question the answer to that depends on the specific use case. So I mentioned, CC licenses only work where copyright applies. So a lot of these generative AI tools are using works under exceptions to copyright, like fair use or fair dealing or specific text and data mining exceptions spelled out under EU law. So if they're using content based on one of these exceptions to copyright, then that's also an exception to the CC license. They do not have to follow the CC license restrictions. That's one of the reasons we've been exploring preference signals, is because copyright may not be the right tool to restrict the use of these things for generative AI tools in the way that creators might intend. But if an exception to copyright does not apply, then yes, they do need to follow the CC license. And so they would need to make sure that they're using these things non-commercially.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks a lot. So there's another question has come into the chat on, do you recommend that both institutions and individual authors are listed as copyright holders for works created using institutional tools like Pressbook licenses, and do including both authors and institutions create any complications? Who would like to answer that?
But it's also similar to this question that we have in the Q&A, which actually addresses work for hire. So when an author publishes on behalf of university, and university's intellectual property law declares that the right for 5 years belongs to the university, can an institution decide which license to apply for the content uploaded to the institutional repository if this content, if this content was not licensed before or is unclear, no license information on the content is unpublished? So basically, we have this in my country. We have this in law that author retains moral rights, and the institution has, on the basis of work for hire, the institution has the rights to exploit exclusively work for a certain period of time. In this case, it's 5 years, the same as in this question from Lithuania. And in this case, we usually, the institution decides when we publish in the repository, we put the institution decides on the license if it's not already licensed. But as far as I know, I'm not aware that both authors and the institutions are listed as copyright holders for works created. I can't remember, especially for those limited periods of times. I'm not aware how this is used in practice.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I think we're just coming to the end of our session today. It's gone very quickly, packed full of information, I think, and knowledge. So I would like to wrap up by saying thank you very much to the speakers and to all of the audience for attending. We will share the recording and the speaker slides with permission to everyone who has registered. And I'll also include in the email a link to the links to the a copy of the links that were shared during the chats and the presentation, so that you can also refer to those as well. And also to tell you that the next 2 webinars in the EIFL series will be happening in October. So the next webinar in this series is on the 16th of October, and the topic is Libraries, Copyright, Research and Development, which is the role of copyright limitations and exceptions that we've heard mentioned here today a couple of times. And then the last session will be about what's fair in copyright. So we'll look at the issues of fair use, fair dealing and fair practice in copyright laws that we also hear a lot about as well. And that's on the 23rd of October. So you're all very welcome to register for those events. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much once again to all our presenters and our, who provided us with a great session, and to say have a nice day, morning, evening, wherever it is in your countries. Thanks a lot.